Jake Paul is running an absolute scam. No, not a crypto scam. He is running the biggest scam in boxing. Let me explain this a little bit to you. He's really beginning to come into his own as a boxer. He has 11 professional fights now. He's got all the time and money he could possibly need. He's a young kid, and he's got the best resources possible. He's been training for around 5 to 6 years now, somewhere in there. And yet he is still continuing to fight either undersized boxers, undersized old MMA fighters who he really thinks he has a good matchup against, handpicking his opponents, which, by the way, I know a lot of people say, oh, he's handpicking opponents. Canelo did the same thing. Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. probably did the same. You know, all these guys that are amazing legend boxers did. But the only difference between this and that is, one, for the most part, these guys were at least in their weight class. And two, they were boxers. That is the biggest thing here. If Jake wants to continue to be taken seriously as a boxer, which is great, I think he's really coming to his own. He looked pretty. Listen, before I tell you how bad Mike Perry looked, he looked great in there. He looked like he belonged in a boxing ring, and that's great. I have no problem with Jake Paul in that sense. He's putting the work in. He's putting the time in. He has the money. He has the coaches, and he's really, to a point, respecting the sport, and I love that. But the worst part in all of this is how small the guys he's fighting are. Let's take a look at this MMAfighting.com headline. Jake Paul claims he only outweighed Mike Perry by a slim margin, and that's common in boxing, right? Fair enough, possibly. Let's read through this a little bit. Jake Paul doesn't want to hear about an undersized opponent anymore, yada, yada, yada. Jake's claiming that he weighed in at 200 pounds, which he did. He's not claiming that. He did. Mike Perry weighed in at 196.6. Okay? Two things. Jake definitely had to cut weight to make 200. So how heavy was he going into this? Mike Perry cut, I'm certain, 0 weight going into this fight. 0. He normally fights at 170, 175 pounds. And Jake naturally would walk around at probably 220, 225, if we're being completely honest. He looked about 212, I'd say, in the ring. He looked exactly like it was. 3 weight classes ahead of Mike Perry. As soon as I saw those two in the ring, I'm like, that's totally not even fucking close. And he's continuing to do this. Ben Askren, Tyron Woodley, Nate Diaz, Mike Perry have 2 things in common. All guys that fought at 170 pounds, except for Nate Diaz, 155 pounds he used to fight at. But, jump back and forth. And they're all MMA fighters who, other than Mike Perry, are not known for their striking ability. Tyron, obviously, power, but not world-class striking. Ben Askren said he never once trained striking for an MMA fight, so that's fun. Nate Diaz, very good boxer. We saw him fight Jake Paul. I think if Nate was not 39 years old and making his boxing debut, that fight would have gone a little bit differently because he was having some trouble with Nate Diaz. And then Mike Perry, he is in BKFC, but he's literally just meant for bare knuckle fighting championship. The few moments that you saw Mike Perry do well in this fight were when he was like trying to tie up with Jake Paul and throw punches in the clinches. That's what Mike Perry does. He's not a stand at the range, throw a jab to set up the right hand, throw a jab to set up hooks, go to the body, then go. He's not a technical boxer. So this was like the worst matchup possible for Mike Perry. And this is why I didn't say anything about this fight going into it. Because I had a feeling this was going to happen. Mike was in there. This is how Mike Perry was standing. chin wide open, and it kind of works in bare knuckle, but you can't do that in an actual boxing ring. And when you take a look at Jake's one loss, it is to a guy his size, his age, and who's a boxer. And before we get into the Mike Tyson conversation, Mike Tyson's 58 years old and had to pull out because he has stomach ulcers. Obviously, Mike Tyson is a better boxer than Jake Paul. Mike Tyson has a 58-year-old man's brain. How many of you's dads are in the age range of 55 to 62? Imagine him taking a punch. Now imagine him with over 60 fights taking a punch. It can't be good for you. Jake's average age of opponent is 37 and a half years old. And if you add Mike Tyson into that equation, if they end up fighting, which I don't think they should, that jumps up to 39.6 years of age, his average age of opponent. 5 of the people he has fought were making their boxing debuts, which is fine. He's still a young boxer. He doesn't have that many fights. But this whole I'm just a YouTube kid, I'm just a Disney kid thing, I'm beating all these guys, the shtick doesn't really work for me. The scam is up, buddy. You've been training for 6 years with the best people in the world, with a whole team behind you. If you had anybody, any theater kid that liked boxing with your drive, with no training, could do the same thing with all this money and training that you have behind you. So I would really like you to see even these shitty boxers you were fighting. Like, who would he fight? Andre August and that other dude, the 2 Uber drivers who haven't fought in like 4 years. Fight more guys like that. Keep building up your resume. Stop doing these. At this point, now that you have 11 professional fights, they kind of are gimmick fights. Mike Tyson for sure is a fucking gimmick fight. And I don't care what anybody says. Oh, you think Mike Tyson's a gimmick fight? Yes, he's 58 years old. At this point it is. I'm sorry, I love Mike Tyson. And if he ever sees this, which I know he won't, he'll fucking be pissed and he'd beat the shit out of me. But he's a senior. He qualifies for AARP. It's a gimmick fight. Mike Perry fights at 170 and is just a brawler, not a technical boxer. It's a gimmick fight. Fucking Nate Robinson, who is 5'9", is a gimmick fight. That's not even a warm-up fight as a professional boxer. At least fight somebody who's making their debut too is just terrible. Nate Robinson didn't even train. Gimmick fight. All of these are. So enough of this. No one's going to take you seriously until you start actually fighting guys in your weight class and who are trying to be boxers. That is all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for tuning into the video. Please like and subscribe. Really helps the channel out. And I appreciate you. And I'll see you in the next one.